Howdy everybody, and welcome back to the Atlas Debate Resources YouTube channel. Today we're going to start a new series, and this is something we're going to do every season for both Lincoln Douglas and CX debate. And what it is, we're going to take the resolution and we're going to break it down bit by bit. This one is going to be the 2022-2023 CX resolution. What's going to be a little bit different about the CX resolutions versus the LD resolutions is that with CX, because of their size, we're going to have to break it down part by part. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. So to get started, first kind of answer a little bit of a question. What is the purpose of a CX resolution? As a novice, you may be asking this, or maybe as a veteran, you haven't really thought about it. It's important to think about what the purpose is and what you're trying to do, because like we talked about in the difference between CX and LD video, is that CX is all about doing something. So we've got to try and figure out that purpose. So first point is obviously the CX resolution is set a platform for debate. But what that means is, specifically, is that A, there has to be grounds for the affirmative to plan a way to achieve the resolution. So there has to be enough evidence, enough potential that the affirmative can create a plan. So it has to be very wide. And as you know, the plan covers the stock issues. So there should be enough evidence that the affirmative can show that whatever plan they create, they can A, solve for it, obviously, but also go through and show the harms, barriers preventing it from being in place, topicality, and its significance. But the platform for debate is not limited to helping the affirmative. You also have to have grounds for the negative to show disadvantages with the resolution and or plan to achieve the resolution's end goal without the traditional means of the resolution. So it's kind of big $10 words. To kind of put it in layman's terms, the neg has to have something to clash, to debate over. They have to A, show that for going with biotechnology, artificial intelligence, any of these things, there are disadvantages of doing those things. Or there's disadvantages just with the affirmative plan as it is. So maybe their plan involves handing it over to NATO, and they can show the disadvantages of working with NATO. Or they can show that they can achieve it themselves without using the means of the resolution, or maybe in a contrary way to the affirmative. Very common counterplans are the state solves counterplan. You won't see this very much in this resolution, but the idea is that the agent of action, the ultimate agent, could solve better than the one being used in the resolution. In addition, a topic must be currently significant to the United States federal government and the American people as a whole. So UIL is unique compared to the other competitions because we are designed specifically for education. NSDA, TFA, all of those are made more for people to compete, whereas this one's for something for you to learn from. And because of that, it has to be kind of current event-ish. And then finally, like I talked about, to expand more on, is to foster educational pursuits. So they're not going to create a resolution where you're going to use too much jargon or it's going to get so specific that you're not really learning anything out of it. With that in mind, we talk about the purpose. Let's actually talk about the current 2022-2023 UIL CX resolution. A little bit of a drum roll, please. So, resolved, the United States federal government substantially increased its security cooperation with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in one or more of the following areas: artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and cybersecurity. You see right there, we got the NATO flag. This stands out a lot compared to previous topics because for a lot of reasons, we're going to talk about that. But one, it eliminates a lot of traditional negative strategies we see. There's not really a state solves counterplan we can do here all that much, but there will be alternatives that you'll see later on. Not so much in this video today, though. With that in mind, the part we're going to discuss today is just the beginning. So we got a little man walking. He's starting to walk. So today we're just starting with the intro. We're going to talk about the United States federal government to substantially increase its security cooperation with the. We're going to define USFG, substantially increase in security cooperation. So with that in mind, starting us off, the United States federal government. For you novice CXers, you can turn to your veteran CXers and they'll tell you that every single resolution they've ever had has started off with the United States federal government. That's very important for CX. To define that, simply, it means the government of the United States of America and any body or entity exercising executive, legislative, judicial, regulatory, or administrative functions of the government of the United States, according to Law Insider. So I know you're thinking, whoa, Robert, it's a lot of information. Let's kind of break it down, unpack it. Simply put, it's just the government. So not, our state government, not the city government, but the big guy, the one that controls the entire U.S. The three branches you learned about, that's where these come in. So you've got your judicial, executive, and legislative. You've got Congress, Supreme Court, President, all of these things. In CX debate jargon, we shorten down the United States federal government to USFG a lot. It's a little something simple for flowing, for saying. The USFG is known as the ultimate agent, meaning that everything has to be administered through it on the affirmative side of things. The negative, you might be able to show that some organization could do it better, but in the affirmative, you have to show the USFG doing ultimately. In years past, resolutions typically had specific agents of actions, so agencies within the USFG, things like EPA, USDA, maybe the Supreme Court, but usually not that. And these are the people that are actually going to go out and enact your policy. But as we'll talk about a lot more in a later video, because we're talking specifically about NATO, there isn't really one agency within the U.S. that addresses NATO. The closest we have is the U.S. and NATO, and then the Department of Defense that deal with it, and Department of Defense is security cooperation. So that in mind, kind of changes the ballgame a lot, and there's going to be a lot of different thinking on the subject. In addition, the USFG is often the inherent barrier for the affirmative plan. So as you may know, and if not, you'll get a chance to learn, a part of CX debate is the stock issues. So they're the parts of the plan that you have to address. And one of them is called inherency. And the idea of inherency is that if your plan is so good, so wonderful, why isn't it happening already? And the way you protect yourself is by talking about inherency, showing there's an inherent barrier stopping it from coming into place. Inherent barriers come in two kinds. There's the structural and attitudinal. Structural are actual laws stopping the plan, whereas attitudinal is people's feelings on it. And the USFG tends to be the inherent barrier in the sense of the USFG is the one that has the policies or the laws in the way, or even it could be political parties controlling one part of the office or another that aren't very friendly with your idea. So with that, it's important to remember that it's very deeply woven in your case. You got to be able to prepare to address it. Even if we're not talking about it as much in years past, it's still very crucial. Brings the next word, substantially. Substantially is in most CX resolutions. It's been every one that I've seen. That doesn't mean it could be in all of them. And the simple definition means being significant or large and having substance, from Black's Law Dictionary. For you CX novices out there, Black's Law Dictionary is usually the highest source for definition in CX debate. Pretty important. We want to stow that away. This definition is from the second edition, so not very current, but kind of gives us an idea to work with. But you may be thinking, well, that's not very specific. What actually makes it significant? And that kind of comes back to your significant stock issue. So going to the stock issues, one of them is going to be significance. And it all falls under a utilitarian ideology in that either you're going to show, without the plan, high amounts of people are going to be harmed, or with the plan, a high amount of people are going to be saved. You in the round kind of decide and define that. So I challenge you, go find a better definition, something that works better for you. In years past, with, for example, agricultural related topics, there are definitions that specifically show what that means to be significant. It's a little bit different here. So however you can find to weigh the round, you want to go ahead and do that. Find that on your own, work that into your case, because you already know that's going to be one of the first negative strategies is running some kind of topicality tease, saying, oh, you're not on topic because you're not very substantial. In addition, harms and advantages, these blend in with the significance and they show what is substantial. So if you are alleviating a high amount of really bad harms or you are giving forth a lot of really good advantages, you're typically going to be substantial. With this, you want to apply the cost-benefit analysis. And what that means is that you want to show that your plan is going to have the smallest cost for the highest amount of benefits. So the little drawbacks for lots of good stuff coming, and that's typically going to make you substantial. So substantially always follows the verb of the resolution, what it's actually asking you to do with your policy. In this case, it's asking you to increase. As you can see with my little video here, kind of growing things up, kind of increasing things. And definition is to become or make greater in size, amount, intensity, or degree. It doesn't say on here that definition is from Oxford Languages. And again, it's kind of vague. So going back to significance, your increasing is going to kind of go with how you define increasing. If you can find one that's a specific term, this shows an increase. Or maybe you just want to make a logical argumentation, going from 0 to nothing is an increase, or just making a little bit of change. You just have to prove that whatever you're doing, small or large, it's going to be significant. But also increasing is part of your solvency as well. If you aren't actually increasing anything, if your opponent can prove that, then you fail not only your solvency, not solving for anything, but you also become untopical. With that, I can already see, in the back of my head, I can see an opponent coming up and saying, well, increase means that there has to be a starting amount. If there's 0, you're not really increasing, you're just creating. And while theoretically, semantically, it could be a bit of a valid argument, but if we look back at this definition, become or make greater in size, nothing to something is still greater in size. That's a little bit of a philosophical argument, but you can show this. But of course, you also have amount, intensity, or degree. So 0 to 1, while may not be a size thing, is an amount thing. 1 is a bigger amount than 0. 10 is a bigger amount than 0, so on and so forth. Intensity. I can promise you this. 100 degrees Celsius is a lot hotter than 0 degrees Celsius. Things like that. So just keep that in mind, remember that, but increase is super valid, super important, because if you're not making sure that you're increasing, you're not topical, and you're not solving for anything. This is the final part of the introduction you really want to know, the security cooperation. And this one, as you can see, it's a very long definition, so bear with me while I read it. I promise I'm going to break it down for you. So, this, according to the Department of Defense, security cooperation is defined as interactions, programs, and activities with foreign security forces and their institutions to build relationships that help promote U.S. interests, enable partner nations to provide the U.S. access to territory, infrastructure, information, and resources, and or to build and apply their capacity and capabilities consistent with U.S. defense objectives. So, I got that out of the way. Lots of big words. Just kind of break it down. This is actually a really good thing, how broad security cooperation is, because typically when you think security and you think NATO, you're thinking guns and bullets and tanks and all of this, but it could really be anything, especially when we look at things like AI and cybersecurity. So maybe if we're talking about anything that helps promote relationships, maybe instead of talking about cybersecurity in the sense of preparing for attacks, maybe you could have a plan that talks about having workshops with member nations. Maybe instead of talking about an AI that's going to kill the world and take over everything, maybe you could make one about an AI that boosts communication between nations. See, all these things, while not conventionally what you'd think of as security, they meet, because according to the Department of Defense, all it has to do is build relationships or promote U.S. interests. So things like infrastructure. Maybe you can talk about how there are AI systems that help build better roads or monitor the internet, or the cybersecurity for internet. Not necessarily protecting for cybersecurity attacks, but making sure that the internet runs smooth and there's less malware and things. So with that in mind, you have a lot of range to work with here. While you can go the traditional route, there's nothing wrong with that. Please don't think that security cooperation is just, shoot and death. It's a lot more. It's a lot of things. So when I'm building your case and you're building your own case, I challenge you to kind of look for something a little bit out of the norm, but it's still important to security. So, like always, we covered a lot of really good information today pretty quickly. So breath of fresh air is kind of look over everything. So we discussed the introduction of this year's 2022-2023 resolution. So the United States federal government substantially increased its security cooperation. We defined USFG, and we noted that it's just, in simple terms, the entire federal government. And we also noticed how this is typically our form of inherency. The USFG tends to create our inherent barrier, especially structural, but sometimes attitudinal. We talked about substantially and how this is what leads to our significance, and also, as in turn, our harms and our advantages, and how substantially just means large, big. And it's up to you in the round to prove what that is, no matter how big or how small, whatever helps you. In increase, we noticed how that's both our significance and our solvency, and we looked and we showed how when we debate increase, we've got to prove that either A, as a negative, that your opponent's going to be off topic, that you have to start with something to increase, or you can show how you don't have to start with something, 0 to 1 is still an increase. And then finally, last but not least, we talked about that long definition, security cooperation, And we noted that it's not merely just things like guns and ammunition, but it's anything that can help foster and promote relationships, which could be things as small as workshops for cybersecurity to things as large as, like we talked about, automated warfare and things like that. With that in mind, looking forward in the series, the next thing we're going to do is have a discussion on NATO, kind of talk about its history, what it is, what it does, what it can and can't do, some of its current initiatives on the realms we're going to talk about, and then we're going to have a video for each area, each branch of the resolution. So one for artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and cybersecurity. Like always, no matter what, I hope you learned something. Like I said, UIL is an educational thing. We're here to learn. As long as you're learning and you're getting something out of this, then I'm happy. If ever you need anything, reach out. If there's something you'd like to hear more about, maybe you want to hear more about security cooperation, or maybe one of these words we want to talk about a little bit more, leave that in the comments below. I love to hear what y'all are looking for, what you see, because ultimately I'm here to help. If you like what you see, please like, share it with people. These are free resources, these videos are. Play them in class, whatever helps you out. With that in mind, like always, Atlas is here to help take a burden off of your shoulders. I hope I did that today, and thank you for your time. Have a great day.